Welcome back to another episode of No Trade Clause Podcast. My name's Anil, and I'm joined today by one of the best in the business, senior NBA reporter for Yahoo Sports and author of Built to Lose, Jake Fischer. Jake, thanks for joining me today. How have you been?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the kind intro, man. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. There's so much going on in the NBA these days, so let's jump right into it, man. A lot of exciting stuff happening. There's an arms race at the top of the Eastern Conference between Damian Lillard joining Milwaukee and Drew Holiday joining the Boston Celtics. We have some serious powerhouses atop the East. So quick recap, let's start with Milwaukee first. So Milwaukee gave up Drew Holiday, Grayson Allen, 3 firsts, 2 of those being swaps for Damian Lillard. Now they're left with no first-round picks available to trade and only 2 second-round picks in the next 7 years. With the new apron rules, they're limited in the buyout market. They don't have any mid-level exceptions. They're basically all in with the roster that they have right now. What were your thoughts on this move, Jake, and do you think it's enough?
We'll see how potent the offensive combination of Giannis and Dame really does become, because I know one of my first reactions, one of a lot of people on the league's first reactions was you gave up a lot of draft capital, the only capital that they had left, to your point, plus a pretty valuable rotation piece in Grayson Allen for them last season, to take a pretty significant step back on the defensive side of the ball. Now, it's Damian Lillard, so perhaps that offensive upgrade is going to be way worth it, to the point where any naysayer, any doubt will look stupid come June. But at this point, I was even talking to someone who was on Mike Budenholzer's coaching staff about the deal, and he said, and this was kind of repeated by a lot of other people too, that Milwaukee's biggest issue in the postseason was half-court offense. And what better way to amplify that type of scoring attack than with Damian Lillard? So we'll see how it all goes. I think the biggest thing for Milwaukee was that they needed Giannis Antetokounmpo to believe and to think that the Bucks were doing everything they could to compete for a championship. And if this trade results come the end of this season and Giannis signing a 4-year extension that he will be eligible for after the season, he's up for a 3-year deal right now, but he can get $70-some million more if he waits. If he signs that, then the Dame trade will be worth it just right there.
I completely agree. If it helps you keep Giannis, there's no question about it. There's no doubts. Let's look at the other contender on the East, in the East, the Boston Celtics. This offseason, they made a ton of moves. They've gone to the conference finals or finals every year for a number of years now. You don't typically see a team in that position overhaul their roster as much as we've seen the Celtics do. So this summer they were busy. They signed Jaylen Brown to a supermax extension worth almost $300 million. They also acquired Kristaps Porzingis, and just now they acquired Drew Holiday. But they did trade away 4 key rotation players in Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, and Grant Williams. What do you think of their moves, and do you think that they had a better offseason than Milwaukee?
I don't know whose was better, to be honest. I think, I saw someone, I think it was, I forget who it was, but I saw someone on Twitter last week say, that type of debate is why they got into the hoops. Like, you want to talk about who's better on paper. To me, that's not where I lie. I like to, sure, you can have a debate about it, but at the end of the day, these teams are going to roll the ball out and we're going to see. So I don't know who's better. I feel like we'll figure it out. But I think the relevant note about Boston is, when they elevated Brad Stevens from head coach to general manager, actually, he might have been the president of the team. There was some skepticism. There was definitely some doubters out there. And the guy's been active every single transaction cycle. He goes out and trades for Derek White, the Al Horford trade to bring him back after he walked in free agency. The fact that they were able to just swing this offseason, I think I just want to give Boston some credit, because so many teams are afraid to shuffle their deck so much and to also give up on their guys. People kind of overvalue their players. Marcus Smart was drafted in Boston in 2014. He's been there ever since Brad Stevens was there. And to cut ties with someone like that for to really address something that Boston clearly thought their front court was an issue. They were open to moving Robert Williams dating back to the trade deadline, I believe. They obviously put him into the Drew Holiday trade to go get him from Portland, and they went out and got Kristaps Porzingis. So to do all that, I think it really showcased that Boston thought that was a big weakness for them. But also, when you send Marcus Smart out the door to upgrade your front court, to replace him with Drew Holiday is a pretty damn good way to fill that any type of hole he could leave. So the timeline's a little bit different. Drew's well into his 30s compared to Marcus, still kind of in the prime of his career, entering the prime of his career. But I think ultimately Drew does have far more of a table setting. He's not really like a traditional break it down table setting type point guard, but Smart, I think he doesn't have that kind of extra pick and roll gear that I think Drew does have. That you combine that with he just kind of can plug and play and fit anywhere around the league, and the shooting ability should provide a real big upgrade, I think, in that regard as well.
Yeah, they obviously got rid of Marcus Smart earlier on in the summer. So it kind of worked out for them that by the end of the offseason, they ended up landing Drew Holiday. So kudos to them. Like you said, you don't really see many teams. You see teams typically overvalue their players. So, yeah, if I was Milwaukee, I would have maybe thought about trying to make this a 4-team trade so they could control where Drew Holiday ended up, because probably worst case scenario is he ends up on a team like Boston. Interesting note, Jason Glushon now represents 4 Boston Celtics, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, Sam Hauser, and now Drew Holiday. I don't know if that played any role in helping Drew land in Boston, but just thought it was an interesting note.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit here. Before Dame landed in Milwaukee, another team kind of out of nowhere was rumored to be in the mix, and that was Toronto. I think they're one of the most interesting teams in the league right now because people don't really know which direction are they going to go. They just signed Jakob Poeltl to a 4-year, $78 million deal, but then they lost Fred VanVleet, and now they have Siakam, OG Anunoby, Gary Trent, and Precious Achiuwa all entering their final season if they don't sign extensions. How do you see the next 12 months going for Toronto?
I think people around the league and fans don't know where Toronto wants to go because I don't think Toronto knows where they want to go. I mean, the fact that you thought it was a surprise they got involved in the Dame trade, to me, I thought it was just another run-of-the-mill Toronto situation where they're getting involved in everything, but they're not actually going to really come away with anything. So, I mean, that's not to discredit the trade for Jakob Poeltl. Anytime you send out a future first-round pick and then reward that player with a deal worth $20 million in average annual value, it's a big-time move. But, yeah, this team has just kind of flirted with every possibility for a long, long time now. And the fact that they won't put OG Anunoby in a trade for Damian Lillard when all indications are that OG is not going to be signing an extension before he can reach free agency this summer, when Pascal Siakam is kind of messaging through his representation, what other back channels you have, that he's not willing to sign an extension anywhere outside of Toronto. But now we're into the preseason and there has been very little word of substantive extension talks there. It's a rocky footing. So I don't know where it will go. Just kind of like I was saying, I don't know who's better between Boston and Milwaukee, but a lot is riding on Darko Rajakovic and his ability to kind of re-energize this roster that, the front office definitely thought last season Nick Nurse wasn't capable of maximizing versus, Nick Nurse, by all accounts, thought that the roster wasn't sufficient enough to compete in the Eastern Conference. And they didn't really make too many changes, right? They lost Fred VanVleet. They didn't really add any true upgrades to that lineup that Toronto felt should have been performing better. So if anything, I feel like the Raptors are positioned to potentially take a step back from where they were last season when they were this team teetering on the edge and people not knowing what to do, because when you don't build momentum in this league, it's very hard to not go backwards. It's kind of like, if you're not winning, you're losing. Like things aren't so binary that way. But from an organizational standpoint, from like I mean, winning at a high level is something that takes time, and it does take momentum. You have to learn how to do it. Your wins end up stacking, and the victories that you pile up with the person to your left and your right, from the coaching staff to the front office to actual players, I think it's really hard to not like keep moving in that one direction and then all of a sudden snap your fingers and you skip ahead 3 steps. So if anything, I'm kind of looking at the Raptors as a team that might be underperforming what their expectations are if all this unrest continues. But we are starting to hear some talk from Darko at scrums and stuff now that practices have started, that the offense is picking up and what have you. So again, we'll see how it all unfolds once the games really get going.
Yeah, I'll definitely be following that one closely. If they are slow out of the gates, I'm expecting them to have a very interesting trade deadline, but like you said, who knows? It could go in any direction there. Before we get off this whole Dame discussion, I just wanted to get your take on what do you think of the haul that Portland ended up walking away with? A lot of people thought they were stuck in the corner, going to end up being forced to take Miami's offer. They ended up getting a lot more than that. So they ended up losing Damian Lillard, Nurkic, Nasir Little, Keon Johnson. And so far in return, they've gotten DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, Toumani Camara, 3 firsts, and 2 swaps. What are your thoughts?
I think the narrative cycle of this league ends up positioning things incorrectly sometimes, where, to me, to look at Portland's return in context of what they could have gotten back from Miami, sure. Like, the obvious was that Dame requested a trade to Miami. That's where he wanted to go. His representation was working behind the scenes to dissuade any team from trading for him that wasn't Miami. But at the end of the day, Portland never truly engaged the Heat. So to judge them based off of any potential package that they could have come from the Heat, I think that's a little bit misguided. Just in general, looking at what they got back, to compare that to something like what Donovan Mitchell went for last season, to me that's more of an apt comparison and a benchmark to really evaluate what the return was. Or you even look at DeJounte Murray going to Atlanta for 3 unprotected picks 2 years ago. Donovan went for basically 5 years of draft capital, plus a couple of other players that ended up being pretty legitimate, like Larry Markkinen. Colin Sexton gets a 4-year, $80 million deal, something like that, around that mark, in a sign and trade. And you go to Portland, for them to get DeAndre Ayton back, which, kudos to the Blazers for kind of pinpointing him as someone that they really wanted to target and acquire in this mega deal, being that, the Suns were off of him. There's a whole podcast to be had, stories to be written about the fractures that developed there, but it's just pretty clear DeAndre Ayton wanted a new home. Phoenix wanted a different center that wanted to have less touches and be far more of a playmaker, a catch, like a dribble handoff and, catch and move the ball type of player, as opposed to someone who wanted to get touches on the post and get the ball on the roll and make plays that way. So to pinpoint him, he's only, I think he's 24 years old, DeAndre. He's still got plenty of room ahead of him. He's maybe considered overpaid, but when you're on a rebuild and you're paying Jeremy Grant already, 5 years, $160 million, I think DeAndre's deal looks pretty good by comparison. To get Robert Williams back, Malcolm Brogdon will have retrade value. And like you mentioned, they have basically 6 years of draft capital now with 3 picks and 3 swaps. To me, that's a very excellent return, and it's going to be interesting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears a little bit here to another Eastern Conference contender. I wanted to get your thoughts on Philadelphia 76ers. This whole summer was filled with drama for them, mainly around James Harden. First, we thought Harden was going to leave in free agency. Then he picked up his player option. Then we thought he was going to be traded. Then we thought he was going to show up to training camp, and now he finally has. But we don't know how long he's going to be there. How do you envision this James Harden saga ending?
I think ultimately he will be traded. I don't know when. I don't know how. But whether it's in the coming weeks, when we get 10, 15 games into the season and some team like the Clippers or another team decides, or maybe there's an Aaron Rodgers type of injury, knock on wood, not wishing that upon anybody. Some team decides James Harden's available. The price is not that high. It's going to be very, very low compared to what Damian Lillard just went for. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's even less than what Drew Holiday just went for. being that Drew Holiday is the most dependable, professional type of player you can find, and James Harden's now on his third straight team that he's, demanded to be traded away from. So that accountability issue is definitely something that's dissuading a lot of teams, and it's limiting the Sixers market. That being said, I am not optimistic that he'll be able to resolve these issues and come back into the team and it'll all be fine. I think he's there to try to not get fined more and to try to keep options all available and to make this thing happen. But I'd be really surprised if he's with the Sixers come the playoffs and all this is water under the bridge and everyone's okay. But if that's his only option, if there is no trade available, there might be a time that comes where he does decide, I need to flip the switch and I need to play because this is my best chance of getting paid next year. That's the ultimate thing. James Harden needs to, from here on out, figure out a way to get himself to a position, whether in Philadelphia or somewhere else, or he can get a lucrative contract offer that he hasn't really had the last 2 off seasons after he turned down a 3-year, $161 million extension from Brooklyn back in 2021.
Yeah. And obviously he wants to be moved. He's made it be known that he wants to go to the Clippers. I'm not really sure if there's any other realistic landing spots for him, but I guess time will tell, and we'll see how that plays out. Now, as we look to the future, a lot of teams and seem to hold on to their assets in hopes that, maybe they'll wait till the next major star becomes available. Who do you see being the next big star that may come available in the next, year, maybe 2 years?
The names that teams are looking at, that executives are hoping for, are Joel Embiid and Luka Doncic. You could throw out 7 different names, but those are the 2 names that you keep hearing that people want, that people are looking at, and they're going to do what they can to try to pry them free. So that's not to say I think they're going to request out. I think it's going to happen soon, but those are the names that, after Kyrie Irving got traded to Dallas, they send out draft capital, and, the Mavericks have limited options to tweak this roster. And what if it just is a volatile combination? It doesn't work out. The Sixers don't have many means to get better either in terms of trade and cap. I mean, they're hoping that this cap space route potentially next season will allow them to go and get somebody. But what if they strike out? What if no one wants to come to Philadelphia? And come July of next year, Joel Embiid's looking around and saying, this plan you told me to wait around for, to either trade for people into our space or to have people sign here outright, it's not working. Who's to say? But right now, I think everyone around the league, all these players are happy where they're at, and they're trying to figure things out moving forward. But this league moves fast. Damian Lillard was a Blazer until he wasn't. Giannis Antetokounmpo was threatening walking until they get Damian Lillard. Now he's saying he's going to resign. So this stuff can change really, really quickly.
Absolutely. I think those are 2 great, potential superstars that could become available depending on how the next year or 2 turns out. We'll see a lot of pressure on those teams. Now, as we gear up towards opening night, some of the stories we're going to start seeing around the league are going to revolve around extensions, whether that be rookie extensions or veteran extensions. It should be interesting to see who signs one. We recently saw Devin Vassell sign a 5-year, $135 million extension with an additional $11 million in unlikely bonuses. That contract starts around 20% of the cap, but by the final year, it drops to around 15.5% of the cap. If you assume it's a 5% increase every year, if you assume it's a 10% increase every year, it's dropping even lower than that, around 12.5%. So to me, I was a little surprised that contract wasn't for more, and that there wasn't a player option in the 5th year. What were your thoughts on that contract?
It seems very team friendly to your point, but at the end of the day, you can never fault a player or an agent for encouraging their client to sign for a guaranteed $130 million. So, I mean, he was a top 10 pick or so, lottery pick. Lottery picks basically get like 4-year, $40 million deals between 40 and 20, which is a lot of money at 18, 19 years old. But when you come off that deal and triple that contract right away, it's really hard to find fault with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's life-changing money. So it's hard to turn that down. I'm going to list off a couple of players. I just want you to rank who you think in order of like highest to lowest, who you think will get the richest contract between these players that could potentially sign rookie scale extensions. Let's go Jaden McDaniels, Emmanuel Quickly, and Devin Vassell. In terms of annual average salary, who are you expecting to be highest, second, and third?
Jaden's probably best positioned, I'd say, because outside of Anthony Edwards, the Timberwolves don't really have too many promising young pieces that they can grow with moving forward. If you consider from like, anyone under 25 or under that has that true ceiling that Jaden does have. And ultimately, he will become their best trade asset at a certain point in time if they are trying to make sweeping changes to their roster. The Knicks may know quickly is more of a luxury than an integral piece. I mean, he was their sixth man last year, but then you bring in Josh Hart. Obviously he was there at the trade deadline, but they just bring in Dante DiVincenzo this offseason. He's not as critical to what New York is building. So I would think Jaden probably takes the cake, put Devin in the middle, and have Quickly at the bottom.
All right. I think that makes sense. And then what about these other three players, Onyeka Okongwu, Patrick Williams, and Josh Green?
Patrick Williams is a prized jewel of the Chicago Bulls front office. I would expect they'd want to pay him and keep him around. Onyeka Okongwu has a lot of big fans in Atlanta, but his situation is a little more clouded. His ultimate ceiling in terms of playing time, impact, contract value, it's definitely impeded by Clint Capella being around. So at one point, does Atlanta decide, is Onyeka going to be their center of the future? Are they still going around Clint because he's got the synergy with Trae Young and Trae loves playing with Clint? Josh Green, I think, is a significantly different scale of player where, honestly, just two guys talking on a podcast, I feel like the Mavericks probably missed an opportunity to sell high on him at the trade deadline, where he could have been put into packages after they traded Kyrie Irving to go get somebody else. He had a pretty poor performance, I think, overall for Australia this summer. And he's just an inconsistent player at this point of his career. So he'll probably get paid. He'll probably get somewhere in the, off the top of my head, I could see him doing something in like 452 type of range. But to me, Matisse Thybulle just got, I think it was 330-ish. I don't know if he's worth more than what Thybulle has brought to the game at this point. I don't think he's proven much more value either.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how these shake out with Josh Green. It might be a lot based on potential. So we'll see. In terms of vet extensions, do you think any of these following players will sign an extension before the season starts? We got Giannis, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, Pascal Siakam, DeMar DeRozan, Klay Thompson.
Paul George, it sounds like they're starting to talk about that. But I'd be surprised if there's real traction between him or Kawhi, just being that the availability stuff, this is kind of like a little bit of a last hurrah, an evaluation year, which is why the Harden stuff is so interesting. Pascal, at this point, I mean, I haven't talked to anybody about it in the last couple of days, but unless something's changed, I'd be surprised there as well. You said one more name I'm blanking on.
Klay Thompson.
Klay, I mean, the Warriors are typically able to take care of their guys. I would think there's probably some opportunity for them to get a deal done.
Interesting. All right. So number one on that list was DeMar DeRozan, that you think is probably most likely. I'd probably agree with that. All right, Jake, I'll leave you on this question. Heading into the season, give me one player and one team that you're most interested to watch and follow this season.
The player I'm most interested in is in my backyard, to me, Ben Simmons. Because if Ben does return to multi-time all-star form, then Brooklyn's all of a sudden a much different beast in the East, and then they all of a sudden have a pretty significant salary that they could possibly trade to go, maybe they could have gotten someone like Drew Holiday if you flash forward and Ben's back. Or is he so good? Are they looking at him and McHale as two of a potential big three to go sell someone to come play with them? So it's interesting. We'll see if this finally is the year he puts it back together. The team I want to watch the most is Oklahoma City. I'm really curious if they can start making their way into the play-in picture, the playoff picture, like seriously, and can they get out of the play-in altogether? Like, could they be hosting a playoff series at some point this year? Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is one of the best players in the world. There's top 5 in MVP voting last year. They got Chet Holmgren coming back. Josh Giddey was one of the better players I saw at the World Cup. What can this team become? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely an interesting year for both. You got OKC, who's trying to make that ascent, and you got Ben Simmons trying to find what he used to have. So we'll see what happens. I like those 2 picks. Jake, I appreciate you taking the time to join me. For those who don't already, definitely give him a follow on Twitter at Jake L. Fischer. Check out his podcast with Dan Devine, No Cap Room, and grab his book, Built to Lose. Thanks again, Jake, and thanks to all of you for listening to another episode of the No Trade Clause podcast.